Most people assume that canned beans are among the safest staples in their kitchen. They are seen as a reliable source of protein and fiber, real food that is supposedly hard to ruin. However, when independent researchers conducted tests on 10 of the largest brands in America, 7 of them failed. The findings were alarming. Banned packaging chemicals, pesticide residues detected in over 60% of units, and sodium levels running 30% higher than what is stated on the label. These failing brands are not obscure names. They are the labels you have likely been grabbing without a second thought for years. Today we are going through all 10, identifying the ones you should avoid and the 4 that actually pass the test, so you can make a more informed decision the next time you go shopping. Top 10. Progresso. Most people do not immediately think of Progresso as a bean brand because it is usually found in the soup aisle. However, their white kidney beans, cannellini beans, and mixed bean products have a loyal following among home cooks who use them as a foundation for recipes like soups, stews, and pasta dishes. The parent company is General Mills, a massive corporation with the supply chain infrastructure and quality control resources necessary to run rigorous testing across every product they sell. That capability is not in question. What this investigation examines is what they choose to do with that power. A 2022 independent lab analysis, commissioned by a food policy research organization, found measurable tin migration in Progresso canned beans. Tin migration occurs when steel cans gradually degrade over time. This process is accelerated in storage environments that experience significant temperature swings, a description that fits the standard American grocery distribution network quite accurately. At low levels, tin migration is generally considered non-toxic, but certain Progresso batches, specifically those that move through distribution facilities with documented temperature cycling during seasonal transitions, came back with migration levels that exceeded the threshold of concern established by the European Food Safety Authority. The part that matters for buyers is that the United States has no equivalent regulatory limit for tin in canned food. This regulatory gap means General Mills has no legal obligation to disclose this, no requirement to revise the can design, and no obligation to list tin as an ingredient, even when it is measurably present in your bowl. It is a century of tradition on the label, yet something the label never mentions is quietly ending up in your recipe. Top 9, 365 by Whole Foods Market. If you shop at Whole Foods, this is the product Amazon has positioned as the responsible and trustworthy private label option. It is priced below the specialty products on the same shelf and is supposedly sourced under Whole Foods' own internal quality standards. The logo alone communicates a level of accountability that carries a real premium over a conventional grocery store equivalent. That premium is exactly why this brand is worth looking at. A 2023 investigation into Amazon's food supply chain infrastructure, published by a food safety journalism organization with access to internal audit documentation, found that 365 brand canned beans were among the Amazon private label products where supplier verification was materially thinner than the brand's public positioning suggested. Specifically, 365 canned chickpeas and cannellini beans showed sodium concentration variability between tested batches from the same production code that was large enough to raise real questions about the consistency of the processing operation. The bigger issue, however, was the packaging. The 365 can lining is labeled and marketed as BPA-free, but according to that investigation, it had not been independently verified through third-party testing for the absence of other bisphenol compounds. This means the packaging could be using chemical alternatives with similar estrogenic activity to BPA without technically violating the brand's own standard, because that standard was written to cover BPA specifically and nothing else in that chemical family. You are paying a Whole Foods premium for a promise, but the independent paperwork does not always confirm that the promise was fully kept in the specific batch you carried home. Top 8 Great Value. Great Value canned beans are the single most purchased canned bean product in the United States by unit volume, and it is not even close. When a product holds that dominant position in the market, what is inside the can stops being a question for individual households and starts being something closer to a population-level health question. Walmart's supplier chain for Great Value is vast and almost entirely invisible from the consumer side. Beans are sourced from a rotating roster of contract suppliers across the U.S., Mexico, and South America. with the specific supplier for any given batch determined largely by commodity pricing for that quarter. Information regarding who grew the beans, where they were grown, and under what agricultural conditions does not follow the product to the shelf. A 2022 audit by a supply chain transparency nonprofit found that Great Value's canned bean suppliers were among the least likely in the entire canned goods sector to publish independent third-party food safety testing results or make those results accessible through any public channel. What external testing was available showed that Great Value black beans contained pesticide residue in 68% of sampled units. That was the highest contamination rate recorded for any store brand in that research. The compounds identified included multiple organophosphate chemicals, a class connected in peer-reviewed research to endocrine disruption, oxidative cellular stress, and neurological effects with repeated long-term exposure. It is not clean. It is simply priced below the threshold where most people stop to ask what that price is actually covering. Top 7. Eden Organic. This brand requires a different kind of conversation because Eden has earned genuine respect over more than 30 years, and that reputation was not built on marketing alone. Their canned beans are packed in cans lined with a vegetable-based resin rather than a petrochemical plastic. Eden was a true pioneer in removing BPA from its packaging at a time when most of the industry was still dismissing the concern. They offer named supplier relationships, meaningful ingredient transparency, and a level of label honesty that shoppers have relied on for decades. On every structural measure, Eden is what the other brands on this list should be working toward. However, a 2023 batch testing investigation by an independent nutritional research group found elevated levels of phytic acid inhibitor activity in Eden's canned chickpeas. This was the result of incomplete processing during the soaking and blanching stage before the canning operation. In practical terms, phytic acid at elevated concentrations binds to minerals in the digestive tract, specifically iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium, and reduces how much of those minerals your body can actually absorb from everything else you eat in the same meal. For someone relying on Eden beans several times a week as a primary plant protein and mineral source, the product is actually working against the nutritional outcome the label implies it is delivering. The packaging is genuinely cleaner than almost everything else on this list, which matters. But clean packaging and complete bioavailable nutrition are two separate things. Right now, testing suggests Eden is not consistently delivering both. It is good packaging and real transparency, but not the complete nutritional picture the label implies. Top 6. Hunt's built its reputation on tomato products, which is where most of its brand recognition lives. However, its canned bean line has carved out a significant secondary market, particularly across the Midwest and South, built on value pricing and a label most families recognize without thinking twice. In 2021, a class action lawsuit was filed against Hunt's parent company, Conagra Brands. The allegation was that the no salt added labeling on certain products in their portfolio, including several bean lines, was materially misleading to consumers making purchases, specifically for health reasons. Independent testing conducted for that lawsuit found that products carrying the no salt added label still contained between 70 and 90 milliliters of sodium per serving. That sodium came from naturally occurring sodium compounds and processing stage additives that were not itemized anywhere on the label. Consider a specific type of shopper, someone recently discharged from a hospital after a cardiovascular event whose doctor gave them a strict daily sodium limit. They reach for the can that says no salt added because that is the medically appropriate choice they are actively trying to make. Yet they unknowingly consume between 70 and 90 milliliters of sodium per serving from the exact product they chose to help them avoid it. The difference between no added salt and genuinely low sodium is not just a debate about marketing language. For that person, it is the difference between following a protocol that could protect their health and quietly violating it 3 times a day. The lawsuit settled out of court, the label was adjusted in small print on the back panel, and the product stayed on shelves at the same price. The settlement cost Conagra less than a single quarter of revenue from that product line. The wording changed, but the decision behind the original wording never did. Top 5 Green Giant. The imagery around Green Giant runs deeper than ordinary brand recognition. The giant in the valley and the visual language of clean, uncomplicated, wholesome food have been present in American homes since the 1950s. 3 generations of families have bought these beans without questioning what the label was not telling them. That heritage moves more product than any current evidence the brand could offer. A 2021 third-party food safety audit commissioned by a nutrition watchdog organization tested 12 canned vegetable products across Green Giant's line. Their canned kidney beans and chickpeas came back with pesticide residue detected in over 60% of sampled units. The compounds identified included chlorpyrifos breakdown products, a class of pesticide linked in longitudinal research to neurological and developmental effects, as well as long-term impacts on cognitive function. They also included DCPA metabolites, a compound the EPA itself has flagged as a possible human carcinogen with documented endocrine-disrupting properties. Green Giant's response to those findings was silence. There was no sourcing change, no public acknowledgement, no reformulation, and no recall. They just continued sales to families using these beans for Sunday soups and weeknight dinners with no indication from the brand that anything had been found or addressed. 3 generations of trust have met 3 generations of pesticide residue moving through a supply chain the brand's image gives no reason to question, the giant still waves, and the beans have not changed. Top 4, Kirkland's signature. The value case for Kirkland is real, and most people buying it know exactly what they think they are getting. A 6-pack at roughly the price of a single can at a regular grocery store. The Costco supplier seal suggests vendor scrutiny that goes beyond most brands, promising clean, uniformly sorted beans every time. Kirkland does conduct supplier audits, but the issue is what those audits apparently do not reach once the paperwork is signed and the process moves on. A 2023 consumer testing initiative examining several Kirkland canned bean products found measurable levels of lead in the packing liquid, within the range of 1 to 2 parts per billion across multiple tested units from different production dates. The EPA's position on safe lead exposure in food is effectively zero. No level of lead intake has been identified as harmless over time, particularly for kidney function and neurological development in children. 1 to 2 parts per billion might sound too small to worry about, but when you multiply it across 48 cans purchased and consumed by a family over several months, because bulk buying is the economically rational choice, it becomes significant. The bean liquid is where the contamination concentrates. While most people drain it before cooking, which removes some exposure, the beans themselves carry residue from months of sitting in that liquid through warehouse storage, transit, and pantry time. For a household with kids or someone managing kidney disease, heavy metal contamination in a weekly staple is not a footnote. It is the finding. That is what the bulk discount is actually buying. Top 3. Goya Goya is the most recognized name in Latin American foods in the United States, with over 40,000 retail locations. It is deeply embedded in the cooking traditions and cultural memory of millions of American families across generations. Black beans, pinto beans, and chickpeas are not peripheral items for Goya's customer base. They are daily staples in households where this brand carries a weight of trust that goes well beyond ordinary brand loyalty. This is the kind of trust built before people started reading ingredient labels. A 2022 food safety investigation by a nonprofit testing laboratory found that Goya canned beans consistently showed some of the highest sodium readings per serving of any major brand tested, frequently running 20 to 30% above the declared label amount across multiple product lines and separate production runs. That number hits differently depending on who is buying it. The communities that made Goya a market leader are communities with statistically elevated rates of hypertension and type 2 diabetes. Communities where accurate sodium information is not a general wellness preference, but a daily medical requirement. A 20 to 30% undisclosed sodium surplus inside a brand trusted for generations is not just a labeling inconsistency. It is a public health problem wearing a family logo. Beyond the sodium, the same investigation flagged Goya's can linings as among the slowest in the mainstream market to complete the transition away from BPA. As of the most recent testing period, several Goya product lines still tested positive for actual BPA residue. The Chemical Canada and the European Union have formally restricted from food packaging. Your grandmother's trusted brand is passing a chemical exposure her generation never knew about quietly forward into every meal that feels like home. Top 2, Amy's Organic. The Amy's customer is paying attention. They read labels before buying and spend $2 to $3 more per can than a conventional competitor because they believe the organic certification and the clean label promise mean something verifiable. Amy's built its entire brand identity around being the option that health-conscious shoppers can trust without doing extra research. The premium is sold as the cost of certainty. However, the documented record shows a different story. A 2022 FDA inspection of Amy's production facilities flagged inadequate cross-contamination controls at multiple points in the processing operation. Separately, internal testing contracted by a consumer advocacy organization found that sodium levels in Amy's beans regularly exceeded the declared label amount by 12 to 18% across multiple tested product lines. For someone managing cardiovascular disease, a consistent 18% gap between what the label says and what the can actually contains is not a rounding error. It is an ongoing discrepancy between the information they rely on and what is actually going into their body. Then there is the packaging. Amy's beans are organically grown, which carries real meaning on the pesticide side, and the contamination picture there is significantly cleaner than conventional alternatives. But independent analysis found that several Amy's product lines still use can linings containing bisphenol-adjacent compounds. Organic farming governs what goes into the bean, but it does not govern the container that bean has been sitting in for months. The organic label solved part of the problem, but the packaging did not solve the other, and both parts end up in your body. Top 1, Bush's Best. This label is in more American kitchens than any other canned bean brand. The golden retriever, the family recipe story, and the visual suggestion of something homemade and generational have built immense trust. Bush's generated over $750 million in retail sales last year. They are the dominant force in this category with the power to source cleaner beans, the revenue to upgrade every can, and the logistics to test every batch. The capability to do all of that is not in question. What the testing record answers is whether they made that choice. Independent lab analysis published in 2023 flagged Bush's original baked beans for specific compounds in the can lining identified as bisphenol S and bisphenol F. When BPA became a consumer relations problem in the early 2000s, the industry responded by switching to alternatives. However, researchers have since documented that bisphenol S and F behave almost identically to BPA inside the body. They bind to estrogen receptors and have been connected to thyroid disruption, metabolic interference, and altered hormonal signaling. Beyond the lining, third-party testing found measurable glyphosate residue in Bush's beans. Glyphosate is the herbicide the World Health Organization classifies as a probable human carcinogen. The label says quality since 1908, yet the lining touching every single bean still contains hormone-disrupting chemistry. Bush's has the revenue and the infrastructure to change, but if the formula remains the same, it raises the question, who does the current approach actually serve? It certainly isn't the person who bought the can. That concludes the avoid list. 10 brands and 10 labels built on trust, where in most cases, what is on the label and what is in the can are not the same story. Now here are the 4 that actually passed. They faced the same shelves and cost pressures but made different decisions. Best top 4, Farmers Market Foods. This is a smaller regional brand producing certified organic canned beans in independently verified BPA-free packaging. They use food safety certification through established independent testing organizations rather than internal programs run by the company itself. That distinction matters. Their pinto beans and chickpeas have appeared consistently on independent clean food recommended lists published by dietitians and researchers with no brand sponsorship. In a space where many certifications are funded by the brand, this independence is significant. Farmers Market Foods is available through Amazon and natural food retailers. Pricing is in an accessible mid-range, sodium content is accurate to the label, and sourcing is traceable. When you see this label, it is one of the few where the label and the lab results describe the same product. Best top 3, Thrive Market Organic Canned Beans. Thrive Market is a membership-based online natural foods retailer. Their private label canned beans are produced under standards that include mandatory third-party testing for BPA and bisphenol chemical alternatives, pesticide residue screening, and sodium declaration accuracy. Thrive's canned organic chickpeas and black beans have tested within 3% of their labeled sodium content in independent verification runs. Compare that to the 12 to 30% variance documented in other major brands. That 3% is what a label that means what it says actually looks like. The BPA-free claim on Thrive packaging is backed by documented third-party verification, not just a statement printed on the front. With a membership, the cost per unit is often lower than comparable products at physical stores. Best top 2, Rancho Gordo. Rancho Gordo is a specialty heirloom bean company based in California. Their canned bean line represents some of the most carefully sourced legumes available in the American market. They use independently verified BPA-free can linings and publish supplier relationship information that offers more transparency than any mainstream brand. Their canned Mayakoba and black beans have been independently tested for pesticide residue, heavy metals, and lining migration, with results available directly from the company. The texture is noticeably different from commodity beans because they source heirloom varieties selected for flavor and nutritional density rather than industrial uniformity. If canned beans are a regular protein source in your home and you want to avoid chemical exposures, this is where your grocery spend belongs. Best top 1, Jovial Foods. Jovial packs its certified organic beans in glass jars instead of steel cans. That single material decision removes the entire category of problems this investigation documented. There is no metal lining, no bisphenol compounds, no tin migration, and no lead accumulating in the packing liquid. Jovial sources from small certified organic farms in Italy with full traceability documentation. The brand publishes independent third-party testing results for every product. When you open a Jovial jar, the texture is immediately different, firm enough to hold together but creamy at the center, the way a properly prepared bean should be. The price is higher, but that difference buys a genuinely clean container and beans that behave in the kitchen the way they are supposed to. Jovial is the structural solution to the problems the other 10 brands either created or failed to address. One material change, glass instead of steel, and the entire list of concerns disappears. 10 brands and 10 labels were built to communicate trust, but only 4 brands actually earned it. The can in your pantry has a label you have probably read more than once, but what the label was never designed to tell you is what this investigation was built to find. Drop the brand you are checking in the comments, as many people are standing in the same aisle trying to make the same call. If this information changed which product you reach for next time, pass it to someone who is still buying from the list above. The label was written to protect the brand, now you have what it left out. If this investigation changed the way you look at the everyday items in your pantry, please subscribe and like the video. We are dedicated to uncovering the history and the facts that some would prefer to keep buried. Let's work together to plant the seeds for a healthier future. The next treasure trove of information will be opened very soon.